Good morning, and welcome to today's edition of GLBC Connections. Today, I want to ask you a question, and I want to challenge you to take some time to seriously reflect upon this question. Maybe that means you find a quiet place by yourself where you can think, pray, maybe even journal if that's something you do. Or maybe you'd like to reflect upon this question with another person who knows you well, who knows your heart, who knows your motives, who knows your thinking, who knows your life. Either manner of reflection would be a good discipline to engage in today. But I really want you to take the time to reflect upon this question because it's an extremely important question. And the question is this: is your relationship with Jesus Christ producing fruit? Fruit is a metaphor that Jesus uses a lot for his followers throughout his life and ministry. I think of the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus says, "You will know my disciples by their fruit." Because of the inner transformation that has taken place within them, their lives will produce fruit. He says something very similar in John chapter 15. It's this famous passage where Jesus says, "I am the vine and you are the branches." And he says, the branches that are connected to me will produce fruit. In fact, he takes it a step further and says, if there is a branch that doesn't produce fruit, it will be cut off and thrown away. Is your relationship with Jesus Christ producing fruit? That's at the heart of the question of Mark chapter 11, beginning in verse 12. This is another one of those scenes where Mark sets up a sandwich, where he begins a story, moves on to a different scene, and then concludes the story. And that whole sandwich communicates an important point. So let's begin by reading the beginning and the ending of the sandwich. Mark chapter 11, verse 12. The next day, as Jesus and his disciples were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went out to find if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. Now we skip down to verse 20. In the morning the next day, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." So here Jesus is walking with his disciples, and he sees a fig tree in the distance. And he's wondering if that fig tree is prepared to produce fruit. Now, Jesus says explicitly it's not the time for figs. But prior to the fig tree producing figs, it would produce little buds next to the leaves. And these little buds were edible and were commonly used as a source of nourishment. But as Jesus approaches this fig tree, it has its leaves, but it doesn't have any buds, which is an indication that it will not produce figs. In other words, this is a fig tree that is going to fail to produce fruit. And because it fails to produce fruit, Jesus offers a word of judgment, a word of condemnation. He's using this fig tree as an example. He's using this fig tree as a living parable for fruitlessness. People of God who fail to produce fruit are also subject to Jesus' judgment and condemnation. And that's what we see in the middle of the sandwich in verse 15. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. I don't want to get into all of the temple nuances and everything that was going on there. I simply want to point out the big idea. Jesus walks into the temple, a temple that is failing to produce fruit, a temple led by religious leaders that are failing to produce fruit. He uses two quotations to illustrate this. The first quotation is one from Isaiah that says, "My house will be called a house of prayer for all of the nations." It's a wonderful passage because it would have been common in Jewish belief to say when the Messiah comes, he's going to clear out all of the other nations and going to leave us with a pure Jewish nation. But that's not what Jesus is doing. Jesus wants the temple to be a gathering place for all nations. But the way the temple is operated, the manner in which the temple is run, is failing to allow that. The second quote is a quotation from Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah chapter 7, Jeremiah condemns the religious leaders who would live lives of evil, live lives of theft, live lives of injustice, yet go to the temple of God and claim that they are okay, that they are protected because they are in God's temple. They are using and abusing God's temple, even though they are not producing fruit in their lives. So Jesus quotes Jeremiah and says, "You are a den of thieves." The big idea is that the temple and the temple establishment is failing to produce fruit. So Jesus enters the temple as a judge. He enters the temple as a judge who is going to condemn fruitlessness. It all comes back to the original question. Is your relationship with Jesus Christ producing fruit? Because the clear and consistent message of Jesus Christ, the clear and consistent message of God's word, is that as we are transformed from the inside out through our relationship with Jesus Christ, our lives will produce fruit. We will look more like Jesus. Or to use the words of Jesus in Matthew 22, we will live lives characterized by the love of God and the love of others. It's important that we take some time to evaluate our lives and to evaluate our relationship with Jesus Christ. Is our relationship with Christ producing fruit? It's something that we all need to reflect upon, and it's something that we all need to think about. And in places where we feel as if we're failing to produce fruit, let's turn to the Lord in confession and seek his forgiveness. In places where we see that our lives are producing fruit, let's take it to the Lord in gratitude for the work that he's doing today. So again, I pray that you would take some time to reflect on this extremely important question today.